Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 22.2C. I've entitled this video, European Domination and Independence of West Africa. This video is going to cover pages 680 to 683. European Domination. In the late 1800s, several European countries were eager to expand into Africa with its many natural resources. After hundreds of years of self-rule, West Africans lost control of their lands to the Europeans. Changing trade. The British government outlawed the slave trade in 1807. Great Britain tried, but could not, keep other European countries from continuing to export enslaved persons. The British founded the colony of Freetown in Sierra Leone in 1787 as a safe haven for runaway or freed enslaved persons. The Americans followed suit in 1822, founding Liberia as a home for freed American enslaved persons. Question number 1. Why were many European countries eager to expand into Africa in the late 1800s? Because Africa had a lot of natural resources. Question 2. What did the British government outlaw in 1807? The slave trade. Question 3. What was Britain unable to do after they outlawed slavery? Keep other European countries from continuing to do the same practice of exporting enslaved persons. 4. Why did the British create Freetown in Sierra Leone in 1787? To give runaway or freed enslaved persons a place to go where they could be safe. Question 5. Why did America create Liberia in 1822? For the same reasons. America wanted a place for freed American enslaved persons to go to. Question number 6 is going to be on the next slide. So let's go ahead and go on. The British encouraged development of the palm oil trade to make up for the loss of revenue from the slave trade. British traders and missionaries familiarized themselves with the trading culture of the Niger River. The British started to profit from their growing role in West African trade. Before long, France took notice. And now we're ready for that question 6. What did the British encourage Africans to do in order to make up for the loss of money from outlawing slavery? They said, hey, you should create a trade of palm oil because that could be a very profitable thing for you to do to make up for the money that you lost from the slave trade, which leads us to question 7. What does the word revenue mean? Revenue is the measure of how much income you create from whatever you're doing. Like in this case, they used to make revenue from selling enslaved persons. Because the British outlawed that, the British realized that the people living in Africa needed to have a different way to generate money, which is called revenue. So they said, hey, try the palm oil trade. Creating colonies. Before the mid-1800s, the British and French posted military in North Africa, and the British and Dutch had settled in South Africa. In 1869, two events increased Europe's interest in Africa. First, the Suez Canal, an artificial waterway connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, opened, and that's pictured in the bottom left, and we've talked about that before when we talked about North Africa. Second, diamonds were discovered in South Africa. We haven't talked about South Africa yet. That's in the next chapter. Question number 8. What was constructed in 1869 that increased Europe's interest in Africa? The Suez Canal. Question number 9. What was discovered in South Africa that increased Europe's interest in Africa? Diamonds. Before that time, Europeans had been in contact with the coastal kingdoms, but few had ventured into the interior of West Africa. This began to change as Great Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, and the new unified country of Germany began planning to carve out empires in Africa. Europeans followed a policy of imperialism, or seizing political control of other places to create an empire. At the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, the European powers established rules for partitioning Africa. The French and British claimed the most territory in West Africa. The modern countries of Benin, Burkina Faso, Chad, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Senegal were French colonies. Gambia, Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and St. Helena were British colonies. Togo started out as a German possession, but Germany lost it in World War I. Some colonies were ruled more harshly than others, but one thing was true about all of them. Europeans made the important decisions about how Africans lived. Settlers from Europe could set up farms on the most fertile land, even if Africans were forced off that land. Africans resisted, sometimes violently. Question number 10. We've heard this word before. What does the word imperialism mean? That's when more powerful groups of people, in this case countries, look to seize or take political control of other places to basically make themselves more powerful. So bullying for countries is what we've called it before. Question 11. Which two European countries claimed the most West African territory after the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885? France and Britain. Question 12. What was true of all European colonies in Africa at that time during the age of imperialism? That the Europeans were the ones making the important decisions about how Africans lived, and they didn't like that very much, as you can imagine. New countries. West African colonies began gaining independence in the late 1950s. The struggle for economic and political success was difficult because of the complex ethnic makeup of these countries. Another factor working against political stability was the actions taken by the leaders. Often they seized power and then used force to stay in power. Ghana leads the way. The Gold Coast had been important to European trade since Portugal set up its first fort there in 1487. By the early 1800s, it was under British control, and in 1874, the Gold Coast became a British colony. The most important industries were gold, forest resources, and a newly introduced crop, the cocoa bean from which chocolate is made. By the 1920s, the Gold Coast supplied more than half the world's cocoa. After the end of World War II, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah led protests calling for independence. Protests flared throughout the colony. In 1957, the Gold Coast gained its independence and became the Republic of Ghana. For many years, Ghana was troubled by conflict. In 1992, Ghana approved a new constitution that established a multi-party democracy. Since then, presidential elections have been peaceful, and Ghana has become a model of political reform in West Africa. Question number 14. What were two reasons why the independent countries of West Africa struggled to find economic and political success? Well, number one, because their countries were made up of a bunch of different ethnic groups, and so it was hard to get them to unify. And secondly, many times the leaders that took power were not good for those countries, and they would use force to stay in power. So you had sort of that dictator-like behavior of the leaders. Question number 15. What were two valuable resources provided by the Gold Coast, or Ghana, in the late 1800s? That would be gold and forest resources like timber. Question 16. By the 1920s, what did the Gold Coast supply for more than half of the world? And this is the third most valuable resource from there, and that would be cocoa. Question number 17. How is Ghana an example of positive political change in the world? Well, it started out with a lot of issues and with a lot of conflict, but they instituted a multi-party democracy, and since then they've had peaceful elections, and people can see this as a role model of what other countries in Africa can do. Former French colonies. Throughout the 1950s, France made concessions to its West African colonies, many of which had instituted some form of self-rule. The independence of Ghana excited and inspired Africans, however. Cries for independence began erupting all over Africa. French Sudan and Senegal united to become the Republic of Mali. But Senegal broke away the following year, and Mali declared its own independence. In 1960, Mauritania, Niger, Côte d'Ivoire, Gambia, and Burkina Faso declared their independence. By 1961, all of France's colonies in West Africa were independent. Question number 18. By 1961, what had all of France's colonies done in West Africa? They had all declared themselves independent. Nigeria. Nigeria had never been a country before the British combined two of their colonies to form the Nigerian Protectorate in 1914. Several different ethnic groups lived in this new territory. The Yoruba and Edo people had distinct territories in the south. The Hausa people were Muslims who lived in the north. The Igbo people were farmers who began to migrate east after British colonization. When Nigeria gained its independence in 1960, tensions grew between ethnic groups. Because Britain had concentrated most of its development, including building schools, in southern Nigeria, most well-educated Nigerians lived in the south. They became leaders of the new government. Many of them were Igbo, who were mostly Christian. When they ventured north to govern the Hausa, they were met with hostility. Conflicts among the three major ethnic divisions in the country, the Hausa, the Yoruba, and the Igbo, grew violent. Thousands of Igbo living in northern Nigeria were massacred. As many as 1 million more fled to a region dominated by the Igbo. In 1967, the eastern region seceded, or withdrew formally, from Nigeria and announced that it was now the independent republic of Biafra. Nigerian forces invaded Biafra, and after more than 2 years of war, Biafra was in ruins. Starvation and disease may have killed more than 1 million people. For long periods since then, the military has controlled the country's government. A new constitution was written in 1978. A year later, a democratically elected civilian government took office. That ended in a military coup in 1983. It was not until 1999 that another democratically elected president was able to rule Nigeria. Question number 19. Why did Nigeria have so many problems and conflicts when it became independent in 1960? Well, you had a lot of tension between the different groups in the country, because this was not just a country of one group of people, but three separate important ethnic groups that felt different than the other two. You had a lot of tension in those groups, and of course you had a lot of conflict, and it became violent, and as the textbook said, you had a lot of people fleeing, getting massacred. That leads to hostilities, it leads to divisions and hatred, and it's very hard to get those people to unite after such problems occurred. Number 20, what does the word secede mean? It means to break away, just like the Confederate States of our country broke away in 1861 to fight the Civil War. You're going to have the same concept here. The people of Biafra tried to secede or break away from Nigeria. Question number 21. How did Biafra's quest to become a country work out for it and its people? Well, not so good. It was invaded by Nigerian forces, and after 2 years of war plus, it was in ruins, and a lot of people died from starvation and disease. Civil War. Sometimes a military coup erupts into civil war. In late 1989, Charles Taylor, pictured here, led an invasion of Liberia. His aim was to depose the president, Samuel Doe. Ethnic conflict was at the heart of this struggle. Taylor and his rebels were of the Mano and Gio peoples. President Doe belonged to the Kron people. After Doe's arrest and execution, Liberia endured 7 years of civil war. Conflict spilled over Liberia's borders into neighboring Sierra Leone. Thousands of civilians died, and many were forced to leave their homes. The civil war in Sierra Leone did not end until 2002. Estimates are that 50,000 people died and another 2 million people lost their homes in the Civil War. In 2012, Charles Taylor was brought to trial by a special court. He was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity for his part in Sierra Leone's Civil War. Question number 22. Oh, the cat. He's getting all excited over there. I didn't know he was that interested in the history of Liberia. All right, 22. What happened in Liberia in the late 1980s and lasting for many years? There was a military coup, and you had people fighting for power in the country, and it lasted over 7 years. And question 23. How did events in Liberia spill over into Sierra Leone? Well, this conflict spread, and so it did seep into neighboring Sierra Leone, and as you can see there, 50,000 people died, and another 2 million people lost their homes as it spread to Sierra Leone. So definitely not good for them, as Liberia's issues became their issues as well. Well, thank you so much for watching. Before we go, of course, I have a meme for you. And since the book did mention chocolate in this, I love this salad. Chocolate is made from the cocoa bean. Beans are vegetables. Vegetables are in salads. Therefore, this is salad. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.